Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. Happy New Year. It's Thursday, January 2nd. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. 2025 is now here, and it is shaping up to be a big year politically. President-elect Donald Trump will return to the White House on the 20th, with California expected to lead the opposition to his administration's policies. But political change is also underway at the state level. To kick off the new year, several laws have officially taken effect. While we can't cover all of them, we did want to highlight two specific ones. Alexei Koseff is the state capitol reporter for CalMatters and is here to give us an overview. Thanks for joining me, Alexei, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
All right, so I first wanted to ask you about Assembly Bill 1825. It is essentially a ban on book bans. Help us understand this bill a little bit more.
So this new law came out of controversy that's been brewing in California and across the country about the kinds of books that are available to children in libraries. There's been a lot of communities where we've seen pushback to books because parents think they're too sexual or they're too mature because they deal with themes related to gender identity or sexuality, LGBTQ issues. So this is trying to create a standard across the state that says that you can't just ban a book out of the library simply because it deals with race or sexuality. And even though it gives libraries some discretion about where to display books that may be a little bit more mature, it's saying that you can't simply prevent someone from checking them out because they're a minor, because they are under 18 years old.
Okay, this issue of book bans has certainly been a topic here locally in Fresno. In August, you'd reported on how county leaders were trying to create a library review committee to deal with these sorts of issues. Any update on how this new state law might affect trying to form that committee?
Absolutely. So this law is actually directly in response to the library review committee that was established in Fresno and another similar one in Huntington Beach. And it is going out of its way to try and shut down this type of work, saying that, this kind of review that would pull books, out of circulation from making them available to kids is illegal. And that doesn't completely get in the way of Fresno County if it wants to have some stricter rules around where this type of material can be seen. But some of those underlying goals of kind of pulling that material out of the hands of kids altogether would not be allowed. And so if Fresno County wants to keep pushing forward with this committee, it's going to have to reformulate the goal and the mission.
Okay, another state law now in place is Senate Bill 1174. This one prohibits local governments from requiring voters to present an ID to vote. What inspired this law, and can you give us an idea of what the reaction's been?
Yeah, so I find this one interesting, not because it's really going to change anything for voters in California. We already don't have to present ID at the polls in order to vote, but this is putting California at the center of another controversy that's really been growing nationally over election security and whether there should be voter ID requirements, as many states have implemented, in order to cast a ballot. And so there is, again, Huntington Beach, a city in Orange County, has passed a measure to require that in future elections that their voters show ID to vote in local elections. And the state is trying to put its foot down and say, no, that's absolutely in violation of what we as a state stand for and what we as a state allow. And so now they're sort of suing and countersuing, and this challenge is going to get totally caught up in the courts.
Yeah, speaking of Huntington Beach, as you mentioned, their council voted for voter ID laws. Can their county, which is Orange County, counties oversee elections? Do they have any enforceable action, or is this going to be tied up in a lawsuit with the state for months or years to come?
So there's layers to it. I mean, the state has already sued and said what the city is trying to do is illegal. And what the city has said in return is that no, if there's an election that happens that's only dealing with city issues, it's entirely in our control how we want to run this election. And so we're going to do what we want to do, and we're going to have voter ID. And a court has actually sided with Huntington Beach so far. So the state is planning to appeal. But meanwhile, with this new law taking effect now in 2025, this year, that adds a whole new wrinkle, and it creates a whole new, factor for the courts to consider clarifying the law. And so now, we're going to have to see whether Huntington Beach challenges the law to try and get it overturned, whether that, the appeals courts react differently with this new law in place. It's going to be very complicated, and it's going to have big political implications.
Yeah, it sounds like the changing political landscape with this law is going to be something to watch, especially as we go into a new presidential election or a president as well. Just a lot of different factors.
I mean, this is obviously a priority for President Trump to push for voter ID laws across the country, because he argued, in 2020 that the election was stolen from him as a result. So if he can get a foothold in California with Huntington Beach, that's a big win for conservatives across the country.
Okay, I know the state legislature here in California is going to reconvene on Monday and get their new session started. For you, Alexei, what are you keeping an eye on in the coming year in Sacramento?
I mean, I think that this year, the big question is going to be, how much does California play into, fighting with President Trump again? Obviously, Governor Newsom and the legislature were the leaders of the quote unquote resistance back in President Trump's first term. But this time around, there's been definitely less, energy and momentum to fight back. So we'll see whether, they just sort of lose that will to stand up to the president, try and work more actively with him perhaps, or if once things really start going under his administration and California comes in the crosshairs, whether they suddenly change course and get back into that resistance, fighting mode. The other thing I'm really looking forward to seeing how it plays out is that, after the election and things sort of swung away from Democrats a little bit in the results, the leaders of the state assembly and the state senate really refocused their attention around the issue of affordability, which they felt like was decisive in this most recent election. And so I'm, interested to see what kind of plans they bring forward to address cost of living in California, and whether they can keep their members focused and on track to actually deliver big results for Californians.
Alexei Koseff, State Capitol reporter for CalMatters. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
If you want to check out some of the bills we didn't have time to discuss, CalMatters has more on its website. That's calmatters.org. And that does it for today's show. Thanks so much for listening. Producer Jonathan Linden and I would like to wish you a very happy new year, and we look forward to all the stories we'll get to cover on Central Valley Daily in 2025. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
We could all use a little help navigating the news these days. The Consider This podcast wants to give you a hand. 6 days a week, we'll help you make sense of the day's biggest news story and what it means for you in less than 15 minutes. Listen now to the Consider This podcast from NPR.